Okay, we are ready to get started. So welcome everyone. I'm Susan Chapman, the Director of Member Services for the Tri-Societies. With me is Ann Jorce, Vice President of ASTA, and representing ASTA's management skills and FUSE committees. We're pleased to have you on the first in a new webinar series titled Leadership, Taking It to the Next Level. This series is designed to provide you with useful information and insights into the management and administration roles you may currently be in or are moving towards. The series is a collaboration between ASA, CSSA, SSSA, and ASTA. There's just a few notes before we begin. You're welcome to ask questions via the chat box on the lower right of your screen. There are two options for posting the question or comment to all audience members or just to the organizer, myself. So be sure to select either option from the drop-down in the chat section. To keep the flow of the webinar, we'll answer questions at the end of the presentation. After the webinar,
We appear to be having a technical difficulty. If you'll just hold one moment, please.
Jonathan, have we lost you?
I have no sound. Okay.
There you go. Yes, you're here.
Okay, thank you. Welcome to the first webinar in the leadership series, Taking It to the Next Level. My name is Jonathan Shaver from Envision Partners, a leadership development company focused on people and developing up-and-coming leaders in our agricultural industry. I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. I'm an associate member of the American Seed Trade Association and a member of the Management Skills Committee. The American Seed Trade Association works on behalf of the seed industry to promote the research, development, and movement of quality seed to meet the world's demand for food, feed, fiber, and fuel. Today's webinar is Managing Through Change. Today we have two speakers, both from DuPont. Since joining the seed industry and DuPont Pioneer in 2014, our first speaker, Bethany Drendel, has experienced her fair share of change. In the first 18 months following college graduation, Bethany relocated 3 times for different roles and consequently had 4 different managers during that time. Simultaneously, change felt constant in DuPont Pioneer as business leaders made important and strategic moves, most recently completing the Dow-DuPont merger. She has been in her current role as territory manager for Pioneer for 2 years and is continuing to guide herself and her sales team through transformations in the business and seed industry. Our second speaker, Julie Day, has over 13 years of human resources experiences, 9 years with DuPont Pioneer in the HR business consulting roles. She has supported various functions including IT and finance, as well as marketing, sales support, and most recently, integrated operations, which encompasses engineering, production, and supply chain. Julie has guided leaders throughout the organization through many organizational design iterations and large-scale transformations, including most recently through the Dow-DuPont merger. Today we'll hear 2 perspectives. Bethany will provide us a personal case study of her situation as an employee and as a new manager, leading herself and others through personal and professional change. Julie will then give us a big picture by capturing and translating the change experience and provide a model and methods for leading ourselves and others through change. There will be a lot of time at the end for comments and questions. I look forward to hearing those from our participants. So now, Bethany, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that introduction. As Jonathan prefaced, managing through change is something relevant to everyone at any given point in your life. My story of early career transitions in my personal and professional life is certainly not unique, and that many young professionals experience an overwhelming amount of change as they are getting started in a new job after college. What's somewhat unique to my story is the amount and types of change I've experienced in my short time in industry, large in part due to the ongoing industry changes and changes in the company I work for. As I share my story of changes I've been through over the last several years, I hope to communicate what was learned during those times of transition. With that, I'll jump right into my story of how I've managed myself and others through change since I've started in my career. I'll do that by briefly highlighting some of the major changes I've experienced along a timeline, and then sharing how I've managed through those changes. I'll start in May of 2014. In May, I graduated from Iowa State University, and shortly thereafter, relocated from Ames to Pella, Iowa to start my full-time role with DuPont Pioneer. From June of 2014 to May of 2015, I trained as a production field agronomist at our Hedrick production facility. During that time, I received training at the plant, and I also traveled for trainings in both Johnston, Iowa, and Wilmington, Delaware. In November, I got engaged and began planning for a wedding. Changes in personal life are just as continuous as changes in professional life. While I was a production employee in Hedrick, I had my first experience in the workplace in December. In our integrated operations group, leadership announced some major organizational and structural changes. I had the opportunity to observe others' reactions to those changes, some resistant, some angry, some passive. I was fortunate to have a great mentor at the time who coached me to be aware of those around me, encouraged me to pay attention to how others talked about the change, and to be a leader through change by maintaining positivity. So I was intentional in showing empathy, and I listened to team members and colleagues share frustrations and question changes. But as a young leader, I also shared positivity and optimism with others in hopes that my attitude might in some way impact how others thought about the changes. Throughout the initial weeks and months after the change announcements, it was incredibly important for me to remain self-aware too. While externally, I was able to share optimism and positivity because I truly was positive and optimistic towards the promise the changes would bring, internally though, I became self-aware that I too struggled with the announcements. They impacted people. Some lost jobs. Leadership and structure and processes changed. Change is hard, period. While I was going through this organizational change, I reflected back to when I had a coaching change in college in between years 4 and 5 of running track and cross country at Iowa State. Even though at the time I thought I handled the change okay and adapted, if I'm being honest with myself, I liked consistency. I liked tradition. I valued relationships and loyalty. And I naturally had a don't fix it if it isn't broken type mentality. So internally, I resisted a new coach's tactics at Iowa State, even though externally, as a senior leader on the team, I cooperated. Same thing at Pioneer. I clung to the old to some degree, but I forced myself to begin wrapping my head around the new. I developed a positive attitude around the positive changes promised by leadership, trusted their decisions and process, and focused on our tasks. Moving right along into 2015, in March, I relocated to Bloomington, Illinois to begin sales training with the Northern Illinois sales team. In July, we experienced another change in the Pioneer business. My manager at the time took a new leadership role in Johnston, and I gained another new manager and adapted to another new managerial style. In September, I got married, and just a few short weeks after we returned from our honeymoon, I found out that the account manager role back in central Iowa near my family's farm was open. I applied, interviewed, and then I accepted the account manager role in November. We began what would be a 2-month search for a house, and I lived with my parents back on our farm in Iowa away from my new husband. My new role also meant having a new boss, and once again, I adapted to another new managerial style. Shortly after starting as a new account manager, on December 11th, 2015, came the announcement of the Dow-DuPont merger of equals, and so began our path to the merger. So how did I help my team manage through change, both the change of me being their new manager and the announcement of the merger? First, I'll point out that it's very hard to manage others through change in addition to managing yourself through change. As a new manager of sales reps, I had to adapt to new team members, and my team members had to adapt to me. In the first 90 days with my sales rep team, I was focused on building relationships, establishing credibility, and gaining their trust. I got to know my reps personally. I worked to uncover what motivates them and what's important to them. And I established expectations of each of my reps and learned what their expectations were of me. And when the announcement of the merger came, I did my best to lead myself through that change announcement, maintain positivity, and over-communicate with my team members in an effort to build their trust. I was as transparent with my team as I could be as I became aware of updates, and ultimately gave them confidence to stay focused on their work. In January came the announcement from Pioneer of North America reorganization. The company closed down business unit offices and went to strictly commercial unit structure. David and I at that time also bought our first house in January. I experienced tough personal losses as I watched good friends and colleagues lose jobs as the company realigned resources during that time. This is probably something many of you have experienced. It was particularly important at this time to be empathetic with my colleagues. In February, my manager realigned territories and in the process moved 2 of my reps to a different team and moved 2 different reps to my team. So again, I had to help new team members through the change of a new manager. Around the same time, my husband and I moved into our house. This squiggly line of hills and valleys that I drew in here represents what felt like a constant churn of change for much of 2016. This was natural. Everything was new. Marriage, new job, new city, new people, new house. We weren't yet settled in a church and we didn't have our community established. To add to what was already a challenging year, we learned in October that my aunt had stage 4 liver cancer. Just before Christmas, my husband lost his job. During that time, we adapted. We helped each other stay positive. He made the most out of his time of transition by spending more time with his dad on farming activities, and ultimately, we grew together. In January 2017, I started grad school, and in March, my husband started a new job. We, again, adapted to those changes in our personal lives. In July, I experienced a team member quitting and a change in my rep team. My role and time allocations adjusted significantly. I had to ensure adequate brand representation in that geography, and I became that sales representation for a time while I worked through that transition. I managed myself, my team, my manager, and our customers through this change. While I worked with the appropriate people in the company to work towards having adequate brand representation, I faced questions from my rep team members and customers. I was as transparent as I could be with my team members and customers about the change and communicated the changes appropriately to them. Email and written letters were sent. After that, and most importantly, I had many personal conversations. Those conversations allowed me to understand feelings and questions that customers in particular had around the change. Less than 1 month after that team member change, I experienced yet another significant team change. One of my reps was in a serious auto accident. This incident brought about another adjustment to how my time as a manager would be spent during harvest and selling season. Continued communication with customers and my team members during that time was important to instill confidence in them that not only would my rep fully recover, but that the business had a backup plan to continue servicing and selling customers. Again, I had the opportunity to manage change in the face of negativity and uncertainty by team members. Fortunately for me, in July, I had an important conversation with a mentor in which he recommended I read the book The Energy Bus by John Gordon. The timing of this book recommendation came at what was a critical time for me. It was a powerful reminder to maintain a positive attitude even when there were tough events happening in my work. Because this book was so powerful in helping me maintain a positive attitude during that time, not only do I want to recommend it, I'll share a brief synopsis and highlight the 10 rules for you in hopes that you might want to read it yourself. The author begins by sharing about a man who has a flat tire and is forced to take the bus to work. He isn't happy about the situation. In addition to not being happy about that particular situation, readers learn about multiple situations in the main character's life that are happening that are the basis for a lot of negativity. When the man gets on the bus to go to work, the driver of the bus informs him that this is no ordinary bus. This is my bus, and you're going to enjoy the ride. The driver and passengers of the bus quickly realize and feel his negativity towards the bus and life in general. The driver points out to the man that everyone who gets on this bus has problems and challenges in their life. Throughout the rest of the book, the driver and passengers teach the man and readers about the 10 rules for the ride of your life. Rule number 1, you are the driver of your bus. Take the wheel and change direction if need be. A team member making the decision to quit was out of my control, as was the accident another rep was in. Both situations caused changes in my day-to-day work and workload. I reprioritized during that time and ultimately kept the entire team moving forward, even though my time was being spent differently than what was normally expected by my team members. Rule number 2, desire, vision, and focus move your bus in the right direction. If you have a clear and compelling vision, people want to jump on your bus. It's important to focus on what you want, not on what you don't want. Had I dwelled too long on the fact that I didn't want to have tough conversations with customers about the sales rep change, or worse, not had the crucial conversations, I would have missed out on the opportunity to listen to their concerns and then share my excitement and energy for what new brand representation would look like moving forward. Rule number 3, fuel your ride with positive energy. Positive energy is necessary to take you where you want to go. This rule reminded me that every day I have the choice between positive energy and negative energy. Rule number 4, invite people on your bus and share your vision for the road ahead. Anytime I discussed my plan for moving forward once I had it in place, I was optimistic and shared the confidence I had in that vision. Rule number 5, don't waste your energy on those who don't get on your bus. This concept enforced the fact that you can't drive anyone else's bus, nor should you try to make them get on your bus. Rule number 6, post a sign that says no energy vampires allowed on your bus. I loved this rule especially. Energy vampires are those people or things that suck the positive energy from you. A few other key points that I took from this rule included that your positive energy and vision must be greater than anyone and everyone's negativity. And your certainty must be greater than everyone's doubt. And the positive energy is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. Rule number 7, enthusiasm attracts more passengers and energizes them during the ride. People are always buying you and your energy. Rule number 8, love your passengers. Make time for them, listen to them, recognize them, serve them, bring out the best in them. When you bring out the best in others, you can't help bringing out the best in yourself. Help others discover the value inside themselves. Rule number 9, drive with purpose. When we drive with purpose, we don't get bored or tired and our engines don't burn out. My purpose is to ensure every farmer in my territory has access to a premier seed and agronomy experience with DuPont Pioneer. When I drove with that purpose in mind, I was better equipped to tackle the task at hand and avoid getting distracted by negativity that inevitably showed up during that transitional time. And finally, rule number 10, have fun and enjoy the ride. That's the Energy Bus, and I do hope that some of you take the chance to read it if you haven't already. Finally, where am I today in the midst of the most recent changes? The merger completed September 1st, and organizational change is ongoing today as business leaders guide the company towards the time that 3 individual companies will exist separately from each other. Teams began realigning almost immediately, and because leadership had been transparent about the process, this did not come as a surprise. I got a new manager on October 1st, and again began adapting to a new managerial style. My previous manager moved into a different role in Johnston. Around the same time, I lost my aunt at a very young age. Death at any time is tough to manage personally, but I found that it was so important to take time to grieve and process. Her death came at a time I was processing changes in work and at one of the fullest times of the year from a workload standpoint for both my husband and I. Looking back, had we not taken time to be with family and process that change in our family, it would have been a disservice to my team and my colleagues. Our business continues to evolve. New technologies are constantly being learned, released, and serviced with customers. The business is continuing to adapt to industry changes as well. Through all of that, I'm continuing to lead my team through changes and doing everything I can to provide transparency and communication to keep them informed. Change is inevitable. We can choose to resist it, or we can choose to grow through the changes that occur in our lives. Reflecting on the first several years of my career, I realized several key learnings from the cycles of change I've experienced. First, everyone deals with change at different paces. With that in mind, I encourage you to always strive to be more patient and more positive with each passing day. Know your purpose and drive your bus. I highlighted the book, The Energy Bus, that a mentor suggested I read at what turned out to be a crucial time for me. It challenged me to remain focused on my purpose, remember those things that I had control over, and to not let forces outside my control drive my bus and affect my attitude. That book also reminded me to be flexible, but not change who I am. Over-communication and transparency builds trust. In my first 9 months at the company, I witnessed business leaders communicate important organizational changes when they occurred with as much transparency as they could. Their transparency and positive voice, even in the midst of some uncertainties, gave me confidence and energy to press on, stay focused, and bring others with me. As a territory manager with my own team to lead, I've had the opportunity on several occasions to do the same. Be transparent and over-communicate. As changes in our organization occur, I keep in mind how transparency and over-communication from our business leaders continues to give me confidence and energy to stay focused on my purpose, and I do everything I can to emulate that same behavior when communicating changes to my sales team. My hope is that my communication and transparency gives them confidence in the path forward and drives them to stay focused. Do what you say you're going to do. This is another very important element that contributes directly to building trust. When I tell my team that I'm going to do something or that something is going to happen, it's always important that I do it, but especially important during times of change. This behavior goes a long way in building trust in teams, especially if you're managing a new team. Take care of yourself. Even if you aren't taking care of you, how can you do well taking care of others? I highlighted both personal and professional changes I've experienced since starting my career for an important reason. Change can affect your attitude and your mindset, regardless of whether it's personal or professional. It's important to be aware of how changes might be impacting how you feel and how well you're able to help others. If you don't already know, I encourage you to work to understand your natural tendencies when experiencing change. Finally, during times of change, lean on mentors and be a mentor. If you need a sounding board as you go through changes, reach out to your mentor, just as I reached out to my mentor during a critical period of change this past summer. If others reach out to you during times of change for support, be that mentor when you feel you're ready and able to help someone else through change because you're already down a strong path of managing yourself through it. Now that I've shared my personal story of how I've managed through change and how I've helped others through change, I'll turn it over to Julie to share her insights on helping others through times of change.
Thanks, Bethany, for that personal story of change over your career thus far. As you mentioned, change is inevitable. We all experience change in our personal lives, but we also experience change in the business environment. Our businesses are constantly evolving, and we're changing to outcompete our competitors. We have to. New products and services are introduced to the market. New internal processes or systems get implemented. Change is part of what each of us are paid to do. We're charged with thinking of new ways to solve problems. So whether it's our idea or somebody else's that creates something new, or an unfortunate change like a death in the family. We all need to be able to adapt to the changes we're faced with. So let's start with looking at the visual of the change curve. You may have seen this before. There are 4 phases to the change process: denial, resistance, exploration, and commitment. Anytime a change happens in our lives, we all go through each phase on the change curve. It's a process. We'll spend some time talking about each phase of the process next. Most of us enjoy routine and predictability. Bethany talked about her philosophy of, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But that's not exactly how the business environment operates. So, when a change is upon us in our work lives or our personal lives, each of us start in the denial phase. In this phase, we typically don't understand or see the reason for why a change is needed or why it happened. We have disbelief that something has happened to us. We have all experienced that sinking feeling at one point in our lives. When we're feeling overwhelmed or in a state of shock, we don't know what to do next. We may even question, what did you just say? To ensure that we heard the other person correctly. But after the initial shock of the situation wears off and reality starts setting in, we then move to the resistance phase. It's important to note that resistance is a natural human reaction to change. Expect yourself to initially feel resistant. Bethany talked about that as well. Expect resistance from others around you as well. It's normal. We cannot skip the resistance phase, but our goal is to help others reduce the amount of time they spend in this phase of the process. Again, the change curve is a process and we can't skip the dip in the curve. Our goal is simply to minimize the depth and duration of that dip. So what does resistance look like? Most often, resistance looks like frustration, anger, or low mood. Individuals may be lacking in energy or have a sense of giving up or checking out. Absenteeism could become an issue. During this phase of the change curve, we're recognizing that things are different, but we aren't quite ready to move forward yet. If employees stay in the resistance phase too long, we run the risk of valued employees leaving the company. Or there's an even worse situation. They stay in the organization but are actively working against the change. Some may fear what the changes mean for them, and in the absence of facts, will make up their own stories. This can create a very chaotic environment and a very challenging situation for leaders to overcome. Later, we'll discuss some tactics you can use as leaders to help move others through the resistance phase more quickly. So once we stop focusing on the negatives and we start to let go of what we've lost, we move on to the exploration phase. During exploration, we start to experiment. We're learning how to work in the new environment. We start to adapt and see positives to the change. We start believing things are going to be okay. And finally, the last phase of the change curve is commitment. During the commitment phase, we're making a choice to get on board with the change and adapt to the new situation. We not only accept the changes, but we embrace them. As I mentioned earlier, our goal is to help others move through this process as quickly as possible. We cannot expect employees to make the transition in one step. Effective change management tactics will help minimize the depth and duration of the dip in the curve. Remember, we cannot skip the dip. So now that we know that the change curve is inevitable, what can we do to help others move more quickly through this process? Communication. Communication is the most important thing you do during times of change as a leader. When you think you've communicated, communicate again. Bethany talked a lot about how she communicated with her team when changes were made, with one of the reps on her team quitting. She talked about being as transparent as she could and offering support. She talked to team members and customers about why the change was made. She stated that she sent emails as well as written letters And also, most importantly, she took the initiative to have many personal conversations. During those conversations, she was able to understand others' feelings, their questions, and their concerns. She was candid with them. She let them know she didn't have all the answers, but she committed that she would be open with them as other details were sorted out. She helped them understand why the change was being made and see the positives to help them move past the resistance phase more quickly. As leaders, it's important to be intentional about communicating with your employees or colleagues. Think about the many ways you communicate with others. There are in-person meetings, which this could include group meetings or one-on-one sessions. There are also just the informal or impromptu chats by the water cooler. And more than ever, we're communicating virtually. Think about emails, text messages, social networking platforms. A combination of these methods are important in order for your message to be clear, but nothing can replace an in-person conversation. So what should you talk about? Talk about what you know and what you can share. Stick to the facts. It's okay to acknowledge not all the details are known, but commit that you'll seek input from the team. It's also okay to be candid and acknowledge that you yourself are adapting to the changes. In the resistance phase, people will make up their own theories or stories with the absence of information. So it's best to be out ahead and giving them the facts in order to avoid rumors or misconceptions. As you think about what to communicate, it may also be important to address what's not changing. By talking about what's not changing, this can be an anchor point for employees and customers to hold on to, give them a sense of stability. This leads me to the next thing you can do during times of change. How we communicate is equally as important as what we communicate. We need to connect individually with team members or customers. Personal relationships go a long way during times of change. It opens the door for us to ask and listen to others talk about their concerns and reservations. We want to understand how the change impacts each individual personally. Are there other things going on in their life that might impact how they're dealing with this change? Remember that not every change impacts each person or role to the same degree. We must also understand that everyone will internalize and react to changes differently. In order to help employees maintain positivity and understand what's in it for them, we must know them on an individual basis. Bethany talked about this being a key learning for her as well. She observed that many people were in all different phases of the change curve at the same moment in time. Some adapted more quickly to the changes than others. This helped her tailor the way she interacted and supported each of them. Some of the tactics Bethany used was getting to know her team personally. She learned what motivated them, what made them tick. She zeroed in on what was important to them. By knowing her team well, she was able to connect with them and bring them back to her vision for the team. She was able to help each person see the positives in the situation. Bethany helped her team find the value in the change for them personally. This helped her to build trust and bring her team along with her to the acceptance phase. Next, Bethany mentioned that her mentor gave her the advice to be aware of those around her and pay attention to how others talked about the changes. She was encouraged to be a leader by maintaining positivity. When tough organizational changes happened, Bethany was encouraging to others. She was intentional about showing empathy to her colleagues. She listened as others shared their frustrations and their questions about the changes. She let them vent when they needed to. But she also shared her positive point of view with the hopes that that would change their attitudes as well. We often think as leaders we need to have all the answers. We think that we have to have a response to every question. In fact, most of us are thinking about our response before the person we're having a dialogue with is even finished speaking. During times of change especially, we need to listen more than we speak. Truly understanding the concerns of others will help us address those issues. Most of the time, people just want to be heard. They need someone to listen, and a response may not even be necessary. So using open-ended questions to draw out what's going on with those around you is an effective way to learn about how others are feeling. It also invites them to share their ideas and input. This will move them from the exploration phase of the change curve. Some open-ended questions that you may try could include, how are you really doing? What questions do you have? How do you think we can make this better? What concerns do you have? How can I help? What feedback do you have for me? By keeping the lines of communication open for team members, they'll feel as though their voice is being heard. This will help gain their trust and their buy-in to the changes as well. Encouragement will help move others through the resistance phase more quickly. They will begin to test the waters of exploration and see the possibilities of the positives in the change. And the last thing that we can do to help others through the change curve is to show genuine care and concern for them. Look out for those around you. Make sure they're okay. Notice signs of disengagement or unhealthy behaviors and seek that person out. Ask them how they're doing. Change is hard. It can be emotional and draining. But also don't forget to take care of yourself. It's impossible to be our best when we aren't taking care of ourselves. Know when you need a break and find healthy ways to manage your stress. Bethany also talked about how difficult it is when we ourselves are dealing with our own reaction to change while also helping others cope. She told us that she took time to be with her family when her aunt passed away, even though it was a really busy time at work. It was important that she was properly caring for herself in order for her to care for those around her. And lastly, celebrate successes. As teams come together and adapt to the changes, celebrate that. Bring in donuts to the office or go out to lunch as a team. Handwrite a personal thank you note to employees or colleagues for their commitment to the team. Small gestures can make a big impact to show your team you appreciate their efforts. So as a recap, change is inevitable. Each of us will go through the different phases of the change curve, and we can choose to stay in the resistance phase, or we can choose to move to acceptance. As leaders, we want to support our teams and help them move to acceptance quickly. We do that through the 4 C's: communication, connection, encouragement, and caring. We have to communicate and connect with our employees and colleagues. We must understand those around us individually and on a personal level. We must encourage them to speak up. We need to acknowledge that not everything will be perfect, nor do we have all the answers. We must listen. Commit to being transparent and working through it together. And don't forget to celebrate successes. Showing care and compassion to those around you will help your relationships grow stronger. It'll create greater commitment to the team and the goals. This will ensure changes are implemented seamlessly. So with that, I hope we provided you with information that will be useful the next time you experience a change. Thank you for your listening in today, and Jonathan, I'll now turn it back to you for any questions from the audience.
All right. Thank you, Bethany, and thank you, Julie. These really great perspectives. We now have time for the participants to ask questions. And so if you would, at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see the chat box. I'll ask you to open that and type in your questions, making them visible to everyone. And I'll pick some questions here that seem to be common or of interest. So if you will, just take a moment and start typing in some questions. Okay. Very good. So here comes one in for Bethany. So Bethany, how did you go about finding a mentor?
That is a great question, and one that I've gotten several times. The mentor I referred to actually in the presentation today was actually the first manager I ever had at Pioneer. At that time, just the relationship we established, that initial manager role that this individual played in my life was not so much a manager role as he was a mentor, and he made that distinction very early on in our in my internship. And so I made the request towards the end of the internship as I started full-time with the company to continue that mentor relationship. And as my roles have changed, our interaction levels have changed as well. But I've continued to try and stay in contact with that mentor. It's been more irregular than I would like, but early on in my career, I was in more of a training role that allowed more time to focus on those development type conversations. And I found now being in this territory manager role for the last 2 years that it's been more challenging to set priority on development time conversations. But as I mentioned, it was important at that critical time for me when I was encountering something a change that I'd not dealt with before, that I reach out to my mentor for just suggestions, and just he was someone that I could use as a sounding board. So that's just a relationship I maintained. Julie, would you have any other suggestions on how you've watched others in the organization reach out and find mentors?
Yeah, sure, Bethany. So I think your perspective is right on. A lot of times there are very natural relationships that get formed through starting off in managerial relationships, and as you move on or that person moves on, you maintain that point of contact. Other times there are relationships that get set up. Some companies have formal, connection points, but I really think the best way to find a mentor and find that connection is through those natural relationships, because the mentor-mentee relationship is really about connection and being able to feel open and vulnerable in your relationship to get the most out of it.
Okay, great. Thanks for that addition, Julie. Here's another question that either of you can field, but I think it came from Bethany's part of the talk. It says, was there any warning sign about the team member intentions to resign? Any sign of disengagement? So might be in that time when they're in that resistance phase or denial.
Yeah, so great question. So something I didn't talk a lot about that I'll just mention here. Part of my role as a manager is to understand, each of my businesses. When I refer to sales reps, they're each their own business and representation of the company. At the time, that particular business was one that I had on my radar as being an at-risk business. So while the announcement or their resignation to me came as a surprise timing-wise, it wasn't a surprise that it happened, period. So we are coached to have backup plans for instances, whether they're surprises or planned. It is part of my job to have some type of a plan, at least in thought process, and that helped tremendously. So it wasn't a huge sticker shock, and that really did help me maintain positivity and work with my manager and then others in the company to come to a resolution. So as far as signs, just from a business perspective, that's where I had to utilize my business skills to understand why that business wasn't going the direction that they wanted to and the company wanted them to. And yeah, there were signs for me that I was probably having to spend more time with that particular individual than others on my team. They were more reliant on me as a manager to help them move their business than others on my team as well. Those would be some examples of some signs. Those aren't necessarily telltale, but as far as disengagement, they were engaged, but just from a business perspective, they weren't always moving in a positive direction with me and with the company.
Good. Thank you, Bethany. We have two questions that are kind of related here. One is from a personal perspective, and one is from speaking about others. So the question is, how do you determine if the change or the issues that you're going through in the company are actually worth working through, or when you should move on? And the parallel question to that was, is it different in today's age if to find it? Do you find it more difficult to get people through the change? Today, are we finding more people that are choosing to move on rather than work through the changes? What kind of parallel questions there? Maybe Julie, you might field that one in thinking about how do we know when we should really try to work ourselves through the change, or spoken up?
Yeah, so I think without a lot of context, I'll answer that as best as I can, but ultimately we all have a choice, right? We all have a choice in how we spend our days and spend our time, and where we decide to work. So I think for each of us personally, we need to assess that based upon a lot of times how well our managers and leaders lead us through change. Do we believe them? And I think there's a series of questions that you need to ask yourself about is what are the positives and what are the negatives, and at some point a simple list of, do the positives outweigh the negatives, and do I really trust and believe that these leaders have a vision that you believe in? And if you don't, then I think it is a personal choice it might be time to make a personal choice. So I'll just kind of flip that around to, as leaders, some of the information we talked about today is, if you don't want people to be making a personal choice to leave because they don't believe you, you need to be understanding what's important to them, what makes them tick, and all of those things in order to address that and reduce your risk that somebody is going to make a choice to leave on their own because you haven't been transparent or you haven't been upfront about the issues or the changes that are coming. And as Bethany mentioned about selling the vision and being clear and concise about your vision as a leader in order to combat that.
Very good. Thanks, Julie. Bethany, do you have anything to add there in thinking about yourself as you went through some of these changes? Is this really worth it?
I definitely do. There definitely has to be a strong vision that's repeatedly communicated, and then there has to be action that you see the company take, and there has to be a commitment to what's been, I'll say, promised, for lack of a better word. So when you do have strong leadership leading you through the change, inevitably you should be experiencing just more opportunity to believe them and have faith in that vision and that promise for what change will look like, even though there can be some negative components in the short term from what we see. If we take off our blinders for a second and look at more long-term and intermediate-term changes and what the entire goal of leadership is and how they got to the decisions that they made, if we actually take the time and sit back and look at that and understand it, and then seek to understand how we fit into that puzzle and how our leadership is communicated to you individually, how they see you fitting into that, then I think you can start to work through whether it's worth it to you to continue working through those changes. That's my take on it, and it's a repeat a little bit of what Julie stated, but I've seen that personally. I've seen it from other colleagues as they've worked through changes in our own company here at Dow and DuPont with the changes we've gone through. So I think it's a great question, we're fortunate to have a lot of strong business leaders who have helped lead us through this change and who are continuing to lead us through this change and keep us excited and energized for what's ahead.
Very good. Thank you very much for those responses. Here's one that's a very, very tactical kind of question. I think it's for Julie. And so this is in regard to the change curve when you're coming into that third quadrant of the exploring and the experimenting. So the question is, what can I do specifically as a manager? What tactics or conversations can I have to help a team member start those experiments or those explorations?
Good question. So I would say, I think as changes happen and we start in kind of that shock phase, and then we start to see things actually changing, and that's kind of when reality hits. So at that point, it's kind of a careful balance to, again, understand what matters to them and also communicating what's not changing. I think that's an important piece that sometimes we overlook, especially for, if you can kind of think about long-term employees who, have been doing maybe the same work for a long time. And if you can start to uncover that, you can start to have conversations and you can start to identify the people that are ready for the change and want to move forward and want to move quickly. And you can talk to them differently than a conversation with somebody who's having a harder time with it. And at that point, you can start kind of dripping the changes and chunking it out into smaller pieces to say, this is what's staying the same in your role. Let's start, training on this component, or this part of your work is going to this person. Can you help, get them up to speed with that? But instead of, that work might be going away from you, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's giving you an opportunity for something else to come in. And so helping them understand, again, what's important to them and the positive side, as well as understanding kind of where they're at on the change curve is important, so that you can understand if they need to take things a little bit slower or more quickly.
Very good. So not only communication frequently and communicating why and what's happening, but not every communication is exactly the same to every employee.
Correct.
Very good. All right. So we'll take this as the last question, and this seems to be the most common one that I'm seeing on our chat. And it starts like this. It sounds to me, the participants, that the leadership at DuPont was clear and transparent. They communicated well with you as managers so that you then communicate to your team. And so you had the opportunity to deal with the change and move through that change curve, perhaps ahead of your teammates or the people that you're leading. How do you deal with helping others change when you're having trouble with the change yourself? So maybe you're not in that place of acceptance or exploration or commitment to the change, but yet you're responsible for leading others through it.
Bethany, do you want to take that first, and then maybe I'll follow up?
I don't have a great personal example of how I really struggled with an initial change announcement, and I wish I did for purposes of this question.
Do you think it's necessary, Bethany, to have to agree and be fully committed before you can lead others in that commitment?
I don't necessarily. I think it's important to communicate the facts and the information as quickly as possible to any team or colleagues that you're responsible to sharing that information with. I do think it's important that you recognize the importance of your own personal buy-in to something, and that you, in essence, don't shoot yourself in the foot by coming out immediately with a very negative attitude and putting your own opinion into sharing the information with your team. I think that's incredibly important. So even if you are tasked with sharing information quickly with a group of individuals, you haven't worked through it yourself, and you're still not in a great place along the change curve with that information, it's very important that you can be honest, especially if you're asked. And I think Julie alluded to this in her presentation too, that sometimes as leaders you don't have all the quote unquote right answers, and right answer as a leader sometimes is falling in alignment with company direction and company vision. And if you of yourself as a leader haven't latched onto that vision fully and wholeheartedly and with energy and passion yet, it's okay, I think, to share that with your team and say, listen, this was hard for me to digest as well. And truth be told, I'm still working through it. And I had leaders, in my short time with the company, I've had leaders say that to me. And that only served to build my trust in them that, okay, they're still working through this, and it's okay that I feel the way that I do right now. So I think that part's okay. And I think it's important, like I said, just to communicate the facts and leave as much of your personal feelings out of it as possible.
Yeah, Bethany, that was perfect. So that's exactly what I was going to say around, as a manager, learning to control your own personal emotions, and similar to what Bethany talked about, is still seeking out mentors and other people that are kind of your peers or in your personal life that you can vent to or be processing the change, but not to necessarily portray that to your team. So learning to kind of control your own emotions to situations, and but ultimately we all need to work through the change curve, and at some point you do need to move to acceptance to get your people there. Otherwise, to our previous conversation or question, you may need to make another personal decision.
Mm-hmm. Right. So empathy, by being honest about your emotions, but also being a role model of what it looks like to go through change with a positive attitude.
Yes.
So very good. So I think this has been a powerful presentation, and one to which I think all of us can relate. So I want to end here. We're going to say thank you to Bethany for giving us your personal view, to which we can all identify, and to some aspect of your experience. Your key learnings will help us to take care of ourselves and to take care of others. And thank you, Julie, for giving us a model for organizing the emotional and behavioral chaos that is sometimes associated with the personal and professional changes. The 4 C's that I noted here are the key behaviors of a leader who will most successfully lead their team through change. And these have been duly noted, and I will constantly remind myself to practice and emphasize these actions with my teams. So to the participants, we thank you for your interest and active participation in this webinar. And we invite you to watch for the announcement of our next webinar in the ASTA Tri-Societies Leadership Series, taking it to the next level. And until then, we thank you very much.
And please be sure to fill out your survey that you'll get in an email just following the end of the session. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Bethany.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.